Greetings, this is Jan Spencer in Eugene, Oregon. I'd like to share with you some of the highlights of the past 2.5 years of my radio program, Creating a Preferred Future. This 1-hour production is intended for two audiences: radio station managers, program managers, and radio station directors, and also people simply interested to learn more about moving towards a preferred future. All the programs that are the source for the content for this production are available for broadcasting, and they're all podcasted on my website. Creating a preferred future is action-oriented. Please have a look at the goals. My radio program, Creating a Preferred Future, is broadcast at KEPW 97.3 FM from Eugene, Oregon. I produce one 1-hour program a month, and that program can be bisected into parts 1 and 2 for use by other radio stations. Here's a listing in order of the contents of this overview of Creating a Preferred Future. And remember, these are just highlights from interviews, conversations, and presentations. Remember, you can pause on any slide to take a closer look and to take a break. This is pretty dense information. And you can find links to all these podcasts and YouTube presentations on my website. The first item on our highlight reel is with my good friend Ravi, who lives a block away. Just my luck, I didn't know Ravi. Ravi didn't know me when he and his wife Michelle moved in a year after I did. Their plan from the start with their half-acre property was to create a center for spiritual, economic, social transformation. So we've teamed up over the years for all kinds of events and projects. Ravi and Michelle's beautiful 1,000-square-foot straw bale structure at Dharmalaya has been the scene of a great deal of River Road's permaculture history. There have been permaculture design courses, ecotourism, yoga, seasonal parties, and a lot more, such as hosting out-of-town visitors who attended the Neighborhoods USA Conference in Eugene in 2013. Neighborhoods USA is a national organization of cities with neighborhood programs. Eugene hosted, so for the out-of-town visitors, we organized a site tour here in River Road of permaculture properties. After seeing rainwater catchment systems, passive solar design, de-paved driveways, micro-suburban eco-villages, the out-of-town visitors said they had no idea this was all happening in suburbia, but they added, "It seems like a pretty good idea." Over the years, we've had dozens of permaculture site tours in the neighborhood. In 2015, our neighborhood hosted the Northwest Permaculture Convergence at the Neighborhood Rec Center. To our knowledge, the first permaculture convergence to be held in a suburban neighborhood. We had 35 presentations, plenary sessions, a series of meetings for people specifically interested in permaculture in neighborhoods. We had an outdoor expo with a bookstore, kid space, nonprofit area, skill sharers, and that was free and open to the public. The neighborhood site tours drew 50 to 75 people. The east side of our neighborhood is the Willamette River, and there's a public greenway along the river. It's a semi-natural area and a bike path. Different areas in the greenway have been adopted by people who live in the neighborhood. We have written agreements with the city to make improvements on the property, such as removing invasive species and planting natives. My own particular agreement with the city is to look after a 65-tree filbert grove. In a preferred future, citizen volunteers will be needed to help maintain public space, and that's a part of building civic culture. We've had all kinds of work parties at the Filbert Grove, and the city has helped organize those work parties. The Grove is becoming an important source of local food. It is open to the public and is one of my favorite places anywhere in the world. Another important location in the neighborhood is a 1-acre property known as Vistara. We've had all kinds of neighborhood events and celebrations. The property used to be overgrown by blackberries, and now it's a micro-suburban eco-village. Ravi and I went on for an hour about the history of permaculture in our neighborhood. You can check out more of what we talked about in the podcast. Let's move along. I very much enjoyed a conversation with University of Oregon City and Regional Planning Professor Mark Schlossberg. He's an advocate and has classes in active transportation. That means human-powered transportation. Mark described taking students to Amsterdam and Copenhagen so his students could see what serious city and regional planning for bicycles really looks like. Mark was also part of the inspiration for a group of University of Oregon students who initiated a project with the city of Eugene to build a curb-separated two-way bike path between downtown Eugene and the University of Oregon about a mile away. Mark is a good segue to this next presentation. One of my favorite topics, of course, is pushing back on cars. The arrogance of the automobile civilization is unprecedented in human history, along with the damage it imposes on people and planet. Virtually every innovation in transportation has allowed people to live further from where they meet their needs and where they work. And of course, that curve of distance traveled steepens remarkably with the advent of the automobile. The interstate highway system started in the mid-1950s further steepened the curve of automobile use. The interstates were also known in larger cities for bulldozing minority neighborhoods so white suburban commuters could reach their jobs in their offices downtown. This presentation compared the urban footprint of Atlanta, Georgia, and Barcelona, Spain, two cities with approximately the same population. Atlanta's footprint is about 25 times the size of Barcelona. This image shows the comparative size in real scale. But even as early as the 1950s and 60s, automobile pushback was in full force. This map shows highways that could have been here in Eugene that were never built, that would have seriously carved up existing neighborhoods right here in Eugene. People pushed back, and many of the planned highways were not built. More up-to-date, small examples of pushback occur all over the country, especially as a result of COVID-19, when restaurants built out into parking spaces for outdoor seating. A good bit larger in scale than the parklets are community plazas, a program in New York City where neighborhood groups can satisfy certain city requirements and reclaim blocks of automobile space for community plazas. And of course, Times Square is the most well-known example of a community plaza. Typically, automobiles take up the vast majority of city streets. When people feel safe riding a bike, more people will ride a bike, and reclaiming city street space for bikes will translate into more bike riders. Fewer cars mean less pollution, less noise, less greenhouse gases, and for many, a higher quality of life. The Southwest Corridor in Boston is an excellent example of citizen pushback against a planned freeway project. Instead of an 8-lane freeway, the neighborhoods of Roxbury and Jamaica Plain now have a 4-mile-long corridor park with bike paths, playgrounds, community gardens, and open space. Meanwhile, in Copenhagen, bicycle use is something like 10 times more common than even the best biking cities in the United States. Superblocks are the featured attraction of Barcelona's urban mobility plan. The city had to address issues relating to air quality and noise. You can find out more about superblocks from the YouTube presentation. Links on my website. Superblocks are fascinating, they're exciting, and already about 7 have been completed, and more transformation is in the works. Not to be outdone, the city of Paris, France also has ambitious plans for pushing back on automobiles. In the summer of 2020, municipal elections in many larger cities in France saw progressive mayors elected with agendas specifically to push back on cars. The city center of Groningen, Holland is off limits to cars. If you want to go visit friends on the other side of downtown, it's easier to walk or bike. To take a car would take far longer. The intention with this design is specifically to make cars inconvenient on behalf of a more livable city. Okay, that's enough about car pushback. You can find out more from my website and also online. Kailash Eco Village in Portland is an outstanding example of repurposing the urban landscape. About 50 people live in the Eco Village. The site was a run-down apartment complex well known for its drug shootouts in the parking lot. Ole Erson and his wife Maitre own the property. This is not co-housing, it's a rental. So this experience of Eco Village is affordable to people of modest means. There are minimum requirements for participation in community projects, but most people would live here because they want to be involved. Kailash engages with the wider community, particularly in regard to emergency preparedness. They also have a wonderful intersection repair project and a neighborhood information kiosk. These pictures show before and after, turning a parking lot into the beautiful Mandela Garden. The Kailash website has lots of before and now images, well documented. Kailash is an exceptional example of a preferred future. Joel Magnuson is a not-so-conventional economist in Portland. His gentle and understated speaking style find their way into the way he writes his books, such as Mindful Economics and the Approaching Great Transformation. These are two of Joel's books. Joel finds inspiration in economics from spiritual sources such as Buddhism. Joel is not involved with our 42nd Avenue, but our 42nd Avenue Economic Development Corporation in Portland is a great example of the kinds of economics Joel describes in his book. Another important episode of Creating transforming and transitioning into a sustainable society, a sustainable economy. But important to add, people can make these changes in their own lives, and they can benefit from those changes in their own lives sooner than later. In a sense, people can, to an appreciable degree, be living in the future if they choose to. Here's a short look at comparing the consumer culture with a One Earth culture. Take a pause. What could you add to this list? Gross national product is an estimate of the total value of all the final products and services turned out in a given period by the means of production owned by a country's residents. GNP has been the go-to reference statistic to measure the country's well-being for decades and generations. It's totally biased in favor of growth and business as usual. GNP limits the public's capacity to imagine a different form of economics. GNP considers repairing the damage caused by car wrecks and junk food to be a positive for the economy, while ignoring other forms of social and human behavior that are positives for society and the environment. This graphic shows alternative metrics that provide a more honest and realistic and holistic way to measure a society's well-being, such as living conditions, participation in the community, education, the environment, happiness. Gross national product elevates money-making, buying, selling, and consuming as the most important activity for a society. Alternative metrics can serve us well to help educate the public about health and well-being, and could lead to more people considering that perhaps capitalism is not the best available economic system for people and planet. You can find more information about key leverage point, One Earth lifestyle, and alternative metrics on my website. Marisha Auerbach is a well-known permaculture teacher, advocate, and personality in Portland, the Northwest, and beyond. You'll find the following conversations I describe, including with Marisha, as both podcasts and YouTube videos on my website. Marisha and her partner Zane have accomplished a great deal of permaculture transformation on their small suburban property. They have a small ecological footprint. They produce a lot of their basic needs on site, thanks to those small eco-footprints. Marisha has home-based businesses propagating plants and selling veggie sets. She also consults and teaches what she knows to interns. Marisha shares a divine business with fellow permaculturalist Andrew Millison. Pictured here, their website will tell you about their services. Lois Orkin is the founder of Los Angeles Eco Village, and at 85, she is both a real power pack of energy, plus she's an icon in the realm of eco-villages and intentional communities. One of Lois's primary interests is urban land use. Among all her great stories, this was one of my favorite. The plan is to turn a former automobile repair business into a community social and cultural hub, and related to that project is turning the street next to the former gas station into a car-free pedestrian mall. I love it. In the conversation, Lois describes life at LA Eco Village. LA Eco Village is a pioneer of a preferred future. There's a collective smaller eco footprint. They do outreach into the nearby neighborhood. The lives are enriched of the people who live there, and Lois can take a good deal of credit for all of that. The mission of the Onondaga Earth Corps is to empower youth to be active participants in creating positive change for their communities and the environment. That's the mission statement of the Onondaga Earth Corps on their website. I had a wonderful conversation with Yvonne Chu and Tay Stinson, both staff members of Onondaga Earth Corps. Both Yvonne and Tay described how participating with Onondaga Earth Corps has been so important in their own lives. They've learned useful life skills and gained a sense of self-empowerment. The Earth Corps has programs both for youth and young adults. They plant trees. They learn about water quality and outreach to the community. Many of the participants are from disadvantaged backgrounds. The Earth Corps has presented new opportunities for many of its participants they could not have imagined before. It's changed lives, while enhancing the well-being of the community and the natural environment. That's a pretty good combination. You can find out more by listening to the podcast and seeing the YouTube video with pictures. Here's one of the programs from Onondaga Earth Corps. Syracuse should be proud of the Earth Corps. The conversation with Tay and Yvonne made me think, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if every city had a conservation corps, an Earth Corps, a youth corps for public service, and a place where kids could learn valuable skills that benefited themselves, the environment, and the community. Empowered and motivated young people could be a big assist for helping to bring about a preferred future. I had known about Enright Ridge Urban Eco Village in Cincinnati, Ohio for years and was really curious. A friend in Columbus, Ohio, connected me with Jim Shank, who is the founder of Enright Ridge, and within the last few months, there's been a name change now to Eco Village on Enright Ridge. Enright Ridge dates back to 2004. Jim Shank just had the idea, maybe we can create something of an urban eco-village right here where we live. So they went door to door and invited people to be part of the eco-village. Some people did, some people didn't. But everybody on Enright Ridge and nearby streets benefits. Guiding principles for the eco-village include an ecocentric view of Earth reflected in the principles of deep ecology. Also, the practice simplicity to enrich life and reduce personal impact on the planet. And third, a dedication to knowing and protecting the unique places where you live. I think one of the most impressive aspects of Enright Ridge is this was created just by the people who were living there. Not to suggest it's a commune, but regular people already living on the street came to know each other and cooperate, collaborate, and be better neighbors just because somebody said, hey, this is a good idea, let's do this. So there have been celebrations. They have an intern program. About 35 acres of local open space has been land trusted. Over time, they've reconditioned a number of houses on the street to make them more energy resource efficient. Enright Ridge, definitely an example of moving towards a preferred future. Bob Randall is another change maker. He began to transform his own suburban property in Houston in the 1980s. Bob is a passionate advocate of permaculture and has been a part of many permaculture design courses and teaching untold classes about urban food systems. Bob was the director of Urban Harvest in Houston for a decade. During his tenure, Urban Harvest increased in size from several volunteers and part-time staff to having a budget approaching $1 million. Urban Harvest organizes a gigantic fruit tree sale every winter in Houston to raise money for the organization. Bob has devoted much of his life to advocating and organizing local food production. Sunil Patel in Asheville, North Carolina, is a pioneer of farming suburbia. He connects with people and makes arrangements to grow food on their properties in exchange for a share of the produce. During our conversation, Sunil explained his business, and of course there have been challenges, but it's a real prototype others could make use of. Sunil is not only a farmer, he's a political activist. The two go together quite well. I quote several lines from his website. There is a severe disconnect between the land and our communities. We believe this is the root problem of our broken food and land management system. We are working to create alternative structures that will support the growth of a village-scale food and farming economy. That sounds good to me. True to his word, Sunil is involved in another project called Patchwork Alliance. Patchwork Alliance is a co-op for local growers, crafters, service providers, and makers of all stripes. We're building a stronger Western North Carolina by providing independent producers with ownership in a shared marketplace that connects them with regional residents who want local, fresh, and natural products and who value community-owned agriculture, local economy, and cultural diversity. Allies, Assets, and Actions is the title of a presentation I made that's now located on YouTube. Allies, Assets, and Actions has to be one of the most important topics related to creating a preferred future. Allies and actions are any type of community, organization, entity, ad hoc group, even businesses, neighborhood associations. Practically every community-minded organization in any city or town exists to help improve the quality of life, the safety, the well-being of the community. To me, that means they're all on the same team. They all have the capacity to make common cause. These organizations, entities, programs all have an interest in certain aspects of community well-being. My ideal working with them is to become more ambitious with what those original interests and intentions are. This graphic illustrates a positive feedback loop. When allies recognize assets, that creates actions, which leads to more allies, assets, and even more actions. Here's one of my favorite assets I'm familiar with in my neighborhood. I've been on the board of my own neighborhood association for 15 of the last 20 years, so I'm familiar with the possibilities and the process. A neighborhood association has a standing in the community. It also has the capacity to reach out to the community. It exists to improve the quality of life and the well-being of the neighborhood. And if you are involved with the neighborhood association, even better, if you're on the board, you can help set the agenda of the neighborhood association. Here in River Road, our neighborhood association has been very helpful with putting out information to 8,000 addresses in the neighborhood about permaculture, urban homesteading, resilience, and more. Permaculture is a wonderful example of an asset. Permaculture is a design system. It's a philosophy. It's a way of looking at the world. Permaculture is a set of ideals and ethics that can help us design systems for taking care of human needs in ways that are friendly to people and planet. One of my favorite nonprofit activist organizations anywhere is City Repair in Portland, Oregon. City Repair is all about placemaking, that is, empowering people to transform ordinary places into special places. These special places create community, interest, and show people care about where they live. City Repair is an enormous asset and its ally, and it's empowered into action countless people, not just in Portland, but in many places all over the country. Real economic and political democracy grounded in the real-world understanding of how humans can fit within the boundaries of the natural world would be a game-changing asset for moving towards a preferred future. For sure, the story of creating a preferred future is all about the story of allies, assets, and actions. Place is a community hub and meeting space in Oakland, California. This from their website. Place is a community hub that nurtures physical gathering space for the community. This hub allows people to see regenerative solutions in practice and gain access to the knowledge and resources to empower them to take action in their own lives, their neighborhoods, towns, cities, and bioregions. I enjoyed a very informative conversation with Place representatives Veronica Ramirez and Jonathan Ute. They've both been at Place from the beginning. Place volunteers and organizers have turned a former cement-cutting business into a beachhead for creating a preferred future. Place is an art and maker space. It's an event space. It's also a place that shows what appropriate technology can look like. Place is an excellent example of allies, assets, and actions. Place honors diverse backgrounds, paths, and lineages. Place respectfully acknowledges they are on Ohlone Chochenyo native land. Place is deeply committed to a decolonized vision of community and connection to one another and our planet. I enjoyed a lively conversation with micro-housing advocate Sherry Schultz. Micro-housing, of course, a great way to reduce one's ecological footprint. At the time, Sherry was living in a location that had interesting aspects of micro-housing. She had her own room and bathroom, but shared living space and a cafeteria with about 40 other people, and she loved it. A preferred future, living within its ecological boundaries, means a lot of changes to shelter, food, transportation, and just about everything else. I had chats with 3 friends here in Eugene who live in what might be called non-conventional alternative residential arrangements. Those locations are Duma, Maitreya Eco Village, and East Blair Housing Co-op, and all 3 have their own unique identities. Duma is a large residential house. There's about 9 bedrooms. There's a full basement. And over the years, Alan Hancock, the owner, has made wonderful enhancements to the property. Myself and many others have greatly enjoyed watching the transformation over the years. Out front along the sidewalk are 2 notable placemaking projects, a place where you can write poetry and a place where you can kiss. Duma is a cooperative. People take turns cooking. They buy food together. There is a lot of intentionality there. And of course, that leads to reduced ecological footprints. I love the kitchen. It's like a natural food store. Alan describes life at Duma, and what he describes sure fits in to my vision for a preferred future. Maitreya Eco Village is a project by my friend Rob Bowman. This has been going on for maybe 25 years. Rob is a visionary, and there's a good deal of natural building as well. The area is a bit less than 2 acres, about 15 blocks west of downtown Eugene. There are a number of buildings, some older, some newer, some built up, about 35 residents. In the conversation, Rob describes the history and what it's like living in the Eco Village. There is a social and ecological aspect to life at Maitreya Eco Village. Most eco footprints are pretty modest, and of course a good deal of food produced here as well. There have been some interesting interactions with the city over the years, and Rob explains in the conversation. One former member bought a property next door and took down the fence. Good stories, highly recommended. East Blair Housing Co-op is located in the Whitaker neighborhood of Eugene. As a neighborhood, Whitaker has a reputation for being non-conventional and a little bit outlaw, so East Blair feels right at home. East Blair was founded as a legal co-op in 1982. East Blair is self-managed, and generally it's for low-income residents. The co-op owns about 8 tax lots in 3 chunks you can see here. East Blair is one of my favorite examples of what a preferred future might look like. There's lots of cooperation, collaboration, idea sharing, idea developing, reduced ecological footprints. East Blair requires participation by its membership. They have various committees to take care of the needs and responsibilities of the co-op. East Blair has many features I really appreciate, and perhaps the one I like the most is removing a 10-car parking lot. You can see the picture in the upper left-hand corner. That scene used to be a parking lot, and the shared community space is the red building behind. And then, of course, we've had many site tours of East Blair because it has so many features that, in my thinking, would be typical, normal, regular part of life in the preferred future. My conversation with Skeeter and Ember was just fascinating. Skeeter's lived at East Blair since 1984, and Ember's been at East Blair for 20 years. Check the podcast on my website, suburbanpermaculture.org, for more. Paul Wheaton has a significant resume as a permaculture influencer and advocate. He lives near Missoula, Montana. I enjoyed the conversation with Paul a great deal. He is a colorful character, and he has a lot of projects he's working on, including the Permaculture Boot Camp. The boot camp is a remarkable opportunity for people to learn all kinds of useful skills relating to permaculture, homesteading, and reducing ecological footprints. Paul is also responsible for Permies.com, perhaps the world's largest online forum and place of discussion about permaculture and related topics. Take a look. Paul also is working on another project, and that is to connect people who have farms and are retiring with people who are young and would love to become a farmer. That's the SKIP program. I would love to see Paul come up with another program, something like somehow he could clone himself. You can learn more on the podcast. The words preparedness, resilience, and sustainability have gained a lot of interest over the last few years, for good reason. I wrote a guest opinion for our local newspaper. I have a blog for Mother Earth News, and I devoted 30 minutes in one of my radio programs describing the relationship between preparedness, resilience, sustainability, and a preferred future. Certainly, there are different conditions and circumstances to be prepared for. Humans can't take much credit for earthquakes and volcanoes, but there are reasons many people practice preparedness, and many of those issues, many of those concerns are human-created, such as wildfires and climate change, diminishing water resources, the prospects of mass migrations. So I'm all for preparedness, but ultimately preparedness does nothing to address the issues of human-caused disruption and disaster. The writings, the guest opinion, the podcast all explain how people interested in preparedness already have some of the basic qualities for being interested in resilience and sustainability, and those qualities come down to self-preservation for themselves and for their families and friends, reducing eco-footprints and moving towards a preferred future would make our lifestyles, homes, and communities more prepared, and at the same time mitigating many of the conditions that we already know will contribute to the prospects and likelihood of disruption and disasters. Reducing ecological footprints and producing more of our basic needs closer to home serves many purposes and moves us towards sustainability and a preferred future. Ultimately, it's capitalism and the consumer culture that are at the core, at the base, the reason for this discussion about a preferred future, and as just mentioned, the reason for the existence of thousands of local, national, public interest organizations. The podcasts and YouTube presentations make frequent reference to capitalism and the consumer culture, so let's just take a little closer look. Of course, you can listen to more of my podcasts and YouTube presentations, and of course, people have written books about this exact same topic. There's lots of opinions, but there certainly are some common denominators to most of these criticisms of capitalism and the consumer culture. And this critique will lead directly to a short look at possible futures, and then a short look at what I've been doing here on my own quarter-acre property here in Eugene. And we are on the home stretch of this overview, creating a preferred future. The graphic sums up my opinion of capitalism and the consumer culture. Capitalism can call on a number of mythologies, and the magic hand of the marketplace is one of them. Please pause and just take a closer look. External costs mean the price we pay at the cash register does not give an honest or an accountable story for the product or the service. Capitalism is fundamentally dishonest. There is no informed choice. In terms of efficiency, capitalism is the opposite. Consider the almost infinite variety of jobs in manufacturing and mining, in retail, in administration, education, healthcare, and transportation. Tens of millions of jobs exist to repair the damage caused by tens of millions of other jobs. That's the magic of the marketplace. That's what capitalism calls efficiency. That's the world of external costs. The podcasts and YouTube presentations go into more detail about the critique of capitalism and the consumer culture. What will it take to say enough? And what can saying enough look like in the real world? That's what creating a preferred future is all about. Remarkably, even the mainstream media is beginning to question capitalism and the consumer culture. What might a preferred future look like, and how do we move in that direction? That's what creating a preferred future is all about. More of capitalism and the consumer culture will mean the problems that we have right now will only be worse. Social, environmental, economic, political. Many cheer the idea of a Green New Deal, and there's much to be said on behalf of that idea. But to assume we can have a green version of the affluence and convenience most Americans expect at the present time, I don't think so. The entire economy is propped up by externalizing the cost and turning nature into money. A preferred future, everything is going to cost a lot more, and people won't make as much money either. A preferred future would be greatly assisted by economic and political democracy. The podcasts and YouTube presentations go into more detail on all these topics you see on this slide. Take a moment for a closer look. Our personal lifestyles will be very different. Imagine eco-footprints and the thought that the average French person, English person, Japanese, or German uses about 60% of the resources and energy of the average American, and even on the global scale, they are high consuming. The United States is in a league of its own. A global fair share or sustainable lifestyle to the average American would be almost unrecognizable. Please take a few moments for a thoughtful look at this comparison between the consumer culture and what could be a preferred future. And what would you add? Americans can be exceptional. Learning to live within our ecological boundaries can bring out the best in us. The transformation of my own quarter-acre suburban property, along with my own personal lifestyle, is an effort to move towards a preferred future, to reduce my ecological footprint. Have I done enough? That's hard to say. I don't really know, but it is, for sure, a significant movement in a positive direction. So let's take a short look. And of course, the podcast and the YouTube presentations have much more information to share. I bought my place 20 years ago, and the intention from the start was to do a permaculture makeover. And that means reducing eco footprints and producing more basic needs on site. This graphic shows what I've done with my quarter-acre property. North is to the right. Take a minute for a closer look. Cars are an invasive species. They take up too much room. I depaved and removed my driveway and turned the garage into a living space. This picture shows my backyard. You can see the sunroom, the Gavaloon metal roof, solar hot water heater, conduit for water from the roof to my water tanks, garden, edible landscaping. Some highlights of my property include turning the south side patio into a passive solar space. I have a 6,500 gallon rainwater system. Thousands of people have visited to see what suburbia could look like. My neighbor and I took out an ornamental hedge, and we replaced the hedge with edible landscaping. We couldn't have done the project on our own. The hedge was right on the property line. Given what I've learned from this 20-year adventure, I can safely say that transforming suburbia all across the country would create hundreds of thousands of purposeful jobs. I did report on one of the radio programs my own lifestyle, my own ecological footprint in regard to food, energy, transportation, recreation, and shelter. It's a good point of reference. I devoted an entire radio program and a YouTube presentation to the topic reaching out to a wider audience on behalf of a preferred future. I'll include several main points here, and you can go to my website for links for more information. To start with, I see capitalism and the consumer culture as the common denominator of virtually every major problem we have: environmental, political, economic, public health, and social. Also important to point out that virtually every progressive nonprofit, activist group, and movement exists to repair the damage caused by capitalism and the consumer culture. Reaching out to a wider audience would include these groups, organizations, and movements, both working in common cause with other organizations and movements, but also reaching out more specifically to their memberships and participants. This slide shows only a few of the categories of organizations. There are literally dozens more of categories, and then literally hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that all are addressing essentially the same issue. Whether they would realize it or not, they are addressing the problems caused by capitalism and the consumer culture. Next part of reaching out is imagine if all these organizations and movements and nonprofits invited their membership to downsize, to reduce their ecological footprints, and explain to them how the memberships reducing their eco footprints would make the job for the organizations and movements a lot easier, because it's big eco footprints that are making the problems in the first place. And then imagine organizations like the Sierra Club, the League of Women Voters, or 350, and movements like Black Lives Matter. Imagine they all provided their memberships and supporters with information, examples, and models to show them what moving towards a preferred future looks like. Examples and models just like what you're seeing here on this 1-hour production. Creating a preferred future is all about repair, transformation, and regeneration. We have untold allies and assets to work with, including perhaps our greatest renewable resource, positive human potential. Thanks for your attention. This has been a lot of information. I did have a difficult time choosing what to include in this short 1-hour production. There's a great deal more where this came from.